I discovered my parents had another family, and they've known about me the whole time. The day my grandmother died, I thought my world had ended. I was wrong. It was just beginning to unravel. My name is Olivia, and I was 26 years old when a single dusty box in my late grandmother's attic rewrote my entire existence. The air in the house was thick with the scent of mothballs and faded memories, a melancholy perfume that clung to every surface. My mother, Susan, moved through the rooms like a ghost, her touches gentle as she packed away a lifetime. My father, Thomas, was a steady, quiet presence, lifting heavy furniture and offering a comforting hand on my mother's shoulder. We were a unit, a portrait of a grieving family, or so I believed. My task was the attic, a cavernous space filled with the forgotten relics of 3 generations. I was sorting through a trunk of my grandmother's old clothes when I found it tucked away in a corner, a simple wooden box with no label. Inside, tied with a faded silk ribbon, was a stack of letters. They weren't from my grandfather, who had passed years ago. The handwriting on the envelopes was elegant, unfamiliar. The return address was from a town only 2 hours away, but the name meant nothing to me. Catherine. My fingers, dust-coated and trembling, untied the ribbon. The first letter was dated over 25 years ago, just a year after my own birth. It began, "Dear Eleanor," and my grandmother's name jolted me. The letter spoke of a difficult time, of a love that couldn't be. It spoke of my father, Thomas, not as my mother's husband, but as Catherine's great lost love. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of disbelief. I fumbled for the next letter, dated 2 years later. This one was different. It was filled with a desperate, hopeful joy. Catherine wrote about the birth of her son, a beautiful baby boy she had named Jacob, and in a line that made the blood drain from my face, she wrote, "He has Thomas's eyes. I see him every time I look at my son." I kept reading, a feverish compulsion driving me through years of hidden correspondence. Letter after letter detailed a secret life, a parallel universe that had been spinning alongside my own. There were mentions of a little girl, Grace, born a few years later. There were thanks to my grandmother for sending money, for being a confidant in this twisted deception. And then I found the letter that shattered my world completely. It was from about 10 years ago. Catherine wrote, "I told Jacob and Grace about Olivia. I told them they have a big sister, one their father loves very much. They pray for her every night." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. The attic spun, the neat stacks of my grandmother's life blurring into a kaleidoscope of lies. My father, my stoic, dependable, loving father, had another family, a son, a daughter, and they knew about me. The drive home was a blur of tear-streaked scenery and a roaring in my ears. The letters sat in a box on the passenger seat, their paper weight feeling heavier than a mountain. Every memory of my childhood was being systematically dismantled and reassembled into a horrible new shape. All those times my father went on business trips to that very same town, the one Catherine's letters were from. All those late nights at the office. The extra money for company expenses that my mother never questioned. He hadn't been building a career, he had been building another family. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. How could my mother not know? How could she be so blind? Or was she in on it too? The thought was so monstrous I pushed it away, but it lingered, a venomous seed of doubt in my gut. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the initial shock had curdled into a cold, hard fury. I stormed into the house, the box of letters clutched in my arms like a shield. My father was in the living room, reading the newspaper in his favorite armchair, the very picture of domestic tranquility. He looked up, a smile on his face, but it faltered when he saw the expression on mine and the box in my hands. My mother came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Olivia, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't answer her. I walked straight to my father and dumped the contents of the box onto the coffee table between us. The letters scattered, a chaotic mess of years of deceit. I pointed a shaking finger at them, my voice cracking with rage and sorrow. I didn't have to speak. He looked at the handwriting, at the name Catherine on the top envelope, and all the color drained from his face. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look confused. He looked like a man who had just been handed his own death sentence. He looked caught. My mother stepped closer, her eyes scanning the letters. I watched her face, expecting a meltdown, expecting the same earth-shattering shock I had felt. But her reaction was stranger. Her face paled, yes, but it was a look of weary, ancient pain, not fresh discovery. She sank onto the sofa, her gaze fixed on my father. And in that moment, I knew. She knew. My entire life, my entire family had been an elaborate performance, and I was the only one who had ever believed it was real. The silence in the room was a physical presence, heavy and suffocating. It was my father who finally broke it, his voice a dry rasp, nothing like the strong, steady tone I'd known my whole life. He didn't try to deny it. He didn't try to make excuses. He just began to talk. And as he did, the solid ground of my reality turned to quicksand. He told us about Catherine, a woman he had loved deeply before he ever met my mother. They had been young, their paths diverging, and they had parted ways with broken hearts. He had moved on, married my mother, and they had me. They were happy, he insisted. But then, Catherine had resurfaced. She was pregnant, and she was certain the child was his. He said he had been torn apart, but he had done the one thing he thought was right. He had told my mother the moment he found out. My gaze shot to Susan, to my mother, who sat with her hands clasped in her lap, staring at a fixed point on the wall. She nodded, a barely perceptible movement. It was true. She had known from the beginning. My father explained that they had made a choice together, a terrible, agonizing choice. He would be a father to his son, Jacob, but his life, his marriage, his primary family was with us. They would build a wall around the secret, a structure of lies and omissions, all in the name of protecting me, of preserving our perfect family. My grandmother had been their accomplice, the keeper of the secrets, the go-between for the money my father sent. He spoke of years of careful scheduling, of leading a double life that exhausted him, but he said he did it out of a twisted sense of responsibility to everyone. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a regret so profound it seemed to swallow the light in the room. He said he loved me, that I was his world. And then he delivered the final devastating blow, the one that made everything that came before it seem like a mere prelude to the real tragedy. He said that Catherine and the kids, Jacob and Grace, they didn't just know about me, they knew everything. They had my picture, they celebrated my birthday, they knew my favorite color, my hobbies, the name of my childhood dog. They had been living with the ghost of me in their lives for over 20 years, just as I had been living, unknowingly, with the ghost of them. My mind reeled, struggling to process the sheer scale of the deception. It wasn't just an affair. It was a fully operational two-family system, meticulously managed for over 20 years. My father, the man who taught me how to ride a bike and helped me with my homework, had been a part-time dad to another set of children. My mother, the woman who kissed my scraped knees and held me when I cried, had sanctioned it. I felt like I was in a play where everyone else had the script but me. As if sensing my need for proof, for something tangible to anchor this surreal nightmare, my father walked over to an old roll-top desk in the corner of the room. He produced a key, unlocked it, and pulled out a thick, leather-bound photo album. He placed it on the table in front of me, his hand trembling slightly. With a sense of dread, I opened the cover. The first page was a picture of a newborn baby, swaddled in a blue blanket. It was Jacob. As I flipped through the pages, I watched him grow. There he was, taking his first steps, his face a miniature of my father's. There he was, on a bike, on a soccer team, grinning with a missing front tooth. And then a new face appeared, a little girl with bright, intelligent eyes and a cascade of dark curls, Grace. There were photos of birthdays, Christmases, family vacations to places I'd never heard of. They looked like a normal, happy family, a complete family. In many of the photos, my father was there, smiling, his arm around Catherine. He looked happy, genuinely happy. And it tore me apart. I was looking at a life I had no part of, a life that had run concurrent with my own. I paused on one photo, a picture of Jacob on his high school graduation day. He was in a cap and gown, standing proudly in front of a large stone statue. My breath caught in my throat. I knew that statue. I knew the building behind it. It was the main quad of my university. My father had been there for his other son's high school graduation, on the same campus where I was attending college at the very same time. The proximity, the near misses, the sheer terrifying closeness of our two separate worlds sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. Our lives hadn't just been parallel, they had been intersecting in ways I could never have imagined. For 3 days after the revelation, I locked myself away in my apartment, refusing to see or speak to my parents. The world outside my window carried on, but inside, I was adrift in an ocean of grief and confusion. The betrayal was a physical ache, a constant gnawing pain in my chest. Every memory was tainted. The loving family I thought I had was a hologram, a carefully constructed illusion. But as the initial shock began to subside, a new, more complex emotion started to take its place, a burning, undeniable curiosity. Who were they? Not just names in a letter or faces in a photo, but who were Jacob and Grace? What were they like? Did they hate me? Did they blame me for the life they'd been forced to live? The questions were a relentless tide, and I knew I couldn't find peace until I had answers. I finally called my father. My voice was cold, detached, but I told him I needed to meet them. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, followed by a torrent of relieved, anxious agreement. He made the arrangements. The meeting was set for the following Saturday, at a neutral, sprawling park on the outskirts of the city. When the day came, my stomach was a knot of nerves. I arrived early, choosing a bench under a large oak tree, my hands clammy, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I watched families play, couples walked hand in hand, and dogs chased frisbees, all of them moving through a world that seemed so simple, so normal. And then I saw them. A woman sitting on a bench about 100 yards away, with a young man and a young girl beside her. Even from a distance, the resemblance was undeniable. The young man had my father's tall, lanky frame and his serious brow. The young woman had his eyes. It was them. Catherine, Jacob, and Grace. As I forced myself to stand and walk toward them, the woman looked up and saw me. She said something to her children, and they both turned. There was no shock on their faces, no surprise. There was only a look of profound, sad recognition, as if they had been waiting for this moment their entire lives. I stopped a few feet away, my throat too tight to speak. It was Jacob, the older one, who broke the spell. He took a step toward me, his expression unreadable. He looked me directly in the eye, and what he said next was not a question, not an accusation, but a quiet, earth-shattering statement of fact. He said, "We've been waiting. We're glad you finally decided to come." The world tilted on its axis. His words weren't a greeting, they were an acknowledgement of a shared, secret history I was only just learning. There was no anger in his voice, only a deep, resonant weariness that mirrored the ache in my own soul. We stood there for a long moment, 3 strangers bound by blood and a lifetime of lies, the unspoken truth hanging heavy in the air between us. Finally, Catherine, their mother, gestured to the empty space on the bench beside her. I sat, my body rigid, my gaze fixed on my hands in my lap. She began to speak, her voice soft but steady, weaving the other half of the story. She told me about her and my father, Thomas, about the love they shared and the heartbreak of their parting. She said that when she discovered she was pregnant with Jacob, her first instinct wasn't to cause trouble, but out of a sense of duty, she had to tell him. She fully expected him to disappear, to deny everything. But he didn't. He came to her, and he wasn't alone. He brought my mother, Susan. Catherine described that meeting with a kind of detached clarity. She had braced herself for a confrontation, for a scene of rage and tears. Instead, she was met with a quiet, heartbreaking proposal from my parents. They laid out their plan, the impossible, agonizing arrangement that would define all of their lives. Thomas would be a father to Jacob, and later to Grace, but his commitment was to his family with Susan and me. Catherine, a single mother with few options, had agreed. She wanted her children to have a father, even if he was a part-time one, a ghost who drifted in and out of their lives. She told me that Thomas spoke of me constantly. He brought them photos, he told them stories about my school plays, my soccer games, my academic achievements. To them, I wasn't a secret shame. I was a celebrated, almost mythical figure, the other daughter who lived a perfect, unburdened life. As she spoke, I felt the hard shell of my anger begin to crack, replaced by a profound and sorrowful empathy for the woman and her children. It was then that Grace, the younger sister, who had been silent the entire time, finally spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the afternoon air with razor-sharp precision. She said that there was something my father, and even her mother, didn't know. Something that connected our two worlds in a way no one could have ever predicted. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she scrolled through her gallery. She held it out to me, the screen glowing with an image that made my blood run cold. The photo on Grace's phone showed two girls, arms slung around each other's shoulders, laughing in front of a coffee shop I knew all too well. One of them was Grace. The other was my best friend, my college roommate, the maid of honor I had already picked for a wedding I didn't even have a groom for. Her name was Jessica. We had been inseparable for the last 2 years. We shared clothes, secrets, late-night study sessions, and dreams for the future. She was the sister I had always wanted. And now, staring at the glowing screen, I realized she had been a sister all along, in the most literal sense. Grace explained in a hushed, pained voice that she and Jessica had become friends a year ago. One day, while they were studying in our dorm room, Jessica had pulled out her wallet to show Grace a picture of her amazing family. In the photo, I was standing between my parents. Grace said she recognized my father instantly from the photos her mother kept. She said the world had stopped and she had felt sick. She knew who I was. She knew I was her sister. For an entire year, she had lived with this explosive secret, this knowledge that her new best friend was also the half-sister she had grown up hearing about. She was terrified of what would happen if she told the truth, afraid of destroying my friendship with Jessica, afraid of shattering the fragile peace of her own family, afraid of the cataclysm it would unleash. So she had said nothing. She had played the part of a stranger, getting to know me through Jessica, listening to stories about me, all while holding the key to my entire existence. The betrayal was absolute, a multi-layered dagger twisting in my heart. My father, my mother, my best friend, and now this sister, this stranger who had been watching me from the sidelines. The park, the blue sky, the cheerful sounds of children playing, it all faded into a dull, meaningless roar. I wasn't just the victim of a family secret. I was the punchline of a cosmic joke, a character in a story where everyone else had the script but me. I had spent my life feeling like an only child, and all this time, I had a sister who was close enough to borrow my notes. In the weeks that followed, the world didn't right itself, but it slowly stopped spinning off its axis. There was no grand, happy reunion, no tearful montage of us all becoming one big, happy family. The truth was messy, painful, and awkward. I didn't speak to my father for a month. When I finally did, the conversations were stilted, the chasm between us still vast. My mother and I circled each other like wounded animals, her quiet shame a constant heavy presence. Jessica, my best friend, tried to explain, her face a mess of tears, but the trust was shattered, and I knew our friendship would never be the same. But something unexpected began to grow from the ruins. It started with a text, a simple, "Hey, it's Grace, thinking of you." Then another, and another. We began to talk, not as the secret daughters of a duplicitous man, but as two people who had been thrown into an impossible situation. We discovered a shared love for old horror movies, a sarcastic sense of humor, and a deep-seated stubbornness that we undoubtedly got from our father. Jacob was quieter, more guarded, but he started to include me in group chats, sending me memes and articles he thought I'd like. Meeting Catherine was another hurdle, but when we finally sat down for coffee, I didn't see a homewrecker. I saw a woman who had made a series of impossible choices and had tried her best to protect her children. I had lost the family I thought I had, a perfect, polished unit built on a foundation of lies. But in its place, something more complicated, more honest, and ultimately more real was beginning to emerge. I had a brother who could give me guy advice from a perspective I'd never considered. I had a sister who understood the complicated knot of feelings in my gut because she felt it too. We were a family born from a betrayal, connected by the shared DNA of a man we were all still trying to forgive. The day I found those letters in my grandmother's attic, I thought my world had ended. In a way, it had. The neat, simple story of my life was over, but a new, more complicated, and more challenging one had just begun. It was a story I would have to write myself, chapter by painful, beautiful chapter, surrounded by a family that was bigger, messier, and more real than I ever could have imagined.